Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. We are officially back. Dan Lanning, the Oregon Ducks, kicking off spring practice. And look, we are one spring practice in. There are not a ton of storylines to talk about this football team, but there are a few storylines that came out of spring practice and what Dan Lanning had to say that I think are noteworthy going into the 2025 year. And I think it starts with the buzz that we're hearing about Dillon Thieneman. Now, I don't think this is all that surprising for Oregon fans who follow this program pretty closely. The transfer from Purdue at the safety spot, we knew this kid was a stud. We knew Oregon was getting a very good football player who not only is going to be Oregon's best safety in the 2025 year, but probably would have been the best safety on the football field for Oregon in 2024 as well. But what he brings to Oregon from an experience, from an off the field perspective, that's what I want to highlight. Where, hey, Dan Lanning, it is not his style early in spring practice to be showering his football team with praise. But when he was asked about Dillon Thieneman, his eyes lit up a little bit. And the first thing that he noted was all the extra stuff that Dillon Thieneman was putting in with this Oregon Ducks football program. Now, why is that such a big storyline? Not only are you getting a really good football player, you were getting the leader of your secondary going into 2025. And although Dillon Thieneman's only going into his third year of college football, this is a cat that has played a ton of football going back to his time at Purdue. Why is that notable? Because look at around him. This secondary has the chance to be really, really freaking good, but it's also going to be really, really, really young. I mean, you're talking about guys like Kingston Loper, Peyton Woodyard, Aaron Flowers, maybe even Trey McNutt. Whoever is starting for Oregon at that other safety position is going to be a redshirt freshman or a true freshman in Trey McNutt's standpoint. And then you look at the cornerback room and say guys like Iffy, guys like Dakota Fields, Naheem Offord, Brandon Finney, Roderick Pleasant. These are young, very talented, but young guys in the back end. Who's going to be the glue? Who's going to be the guy that brings this Oregon Ducks secondary together going into 2025? From what we're hearing early on, it sounds like it's going to be Dillon Thieneman. That's what stands out to me is not only is he a really good football player, he's going to be the guy that really brings this Oregon Ducks secondary together. That's exactly what you wanted to hear out of Dillon Thieneman. And that's kind of what we loved about him coming in is, yeah, he's a really good football player, but you're not going to see a football player that has better instincts and better knowledge of the game than a guy like Dillon. It's exactly what you need when you're trying to break in a brand new secondary that I think is going to be very good, but it's also a young secondary as well. Now, we also have a quarterback battle that I want to talk to. I want to talk about a few other storylines that I'm kind of keeping an eye on. Now, before we get into it, as always, the Oregon Duck fans, appreciate you guys. The amount of support y'all have shown the fellas as we've talked this team in February and March, talked the recruiting trail. It's been amazing. Appreciate you guys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Without further ado, let's get into it. Now, we kind of talked about Dillon Thieneman. I think that's the biggest storyline coming out of just the day one spring practice for Oregon. The next one I want to talk about is this quarterback battle. And we've kind of been talking about this for the last couple of weeks. It's legit. Now, who's the leader in the clubhouse? I think it's Dante Moore. But we kind of said during the winter months that there's a reason that Austin Novosad has not hit the transfer portal. And I think that's because he's got a legit shot to win this quarterback one job going into 2025. We're going to see how it plays out. Y'all know that whoever wins this job, many of y'all know I'm a huge fan of Dante Moore going back to his time out of high school. Whoever wins this job, you get the feeling is going to be pretty dang good. What I thought was intriguing that Dan Lanning threw in that quarterback battle conversation was that they are adding more to the offense going into the 2025 year. That's something that we've been talking about the last couple of months where you go back to Dillon Gabriel. He was a great quarterback for Oregon. That Oregon offense was really, really good. But there were certain things that this Oregon offense really couldn't ask Dillon Gabriel to do. Dan Lanning kind of hinted at, hey, we're going to throw some more wrinkles. We're going to throw a little bit more into this offense. And why can they do that? Because you got a guy like Dante Moore specifically who I think is capable of doing a little bit more with the special arm talent that Dante Moore brings to the table. That you talk about what we're going to be looking for in the Oregon Ducks spring game. That's what excites me the most. Do we see a little bit more verticality? Do we see a little bit more thrown to the boundary? Stuff that was not in the wheelhouse for Dillon Gabriel because he was a little bit limited with the arm strength. Do we see that from Dante Moore or Austin Novosad in this Oregon offense going into 2025? Because if there was one knock on this Oregon offense, at times it felt like we didn't push the ball vertically down the field the way we probably can, especially when you're talking about guys like Evan Stewart and guys like DeCorian Moore and a guy like Malik Benson. You got a ton of guys that can work vertically down the field. We want to use those pass catchers in those ways going into 2025. Number three, and this is the story of Oregon's team right now. I think there's going to be a lot of people in the national media that look at Oregon, look at the returning production and say, "Who this Oregon team ain't going to be the team that we saw in 2024. They lose, 12, 13 NFL draft picks. Dan Lanning got out in front of this. And we've been talking about it all winter. It's like, go back to the 2025 class, the crop of freshmen that Oregon has coming in this year. Number 2 high school class in the country, along with the 4th best transfer portal class in the country. Go back to 2024, the number 4 high school class in the country, the number 2 transfer portal class in the country. Let's not ignore what Dan Lanning and the Oregon Ducks have done on the recruiting trail. And so, although the players on this roster are not household names like maybe they were last year at times, that does not mean that this Oregon offense or this Oregon team in general is less talented. In fact, I would go out and venture and say, yeah, it might be a little bit less experienced. It is less experienced. I don't think you can make that argument. It's less experienced. But you look at the talent level of this team is more talented than Oregon was in 2024. Now, can that talent get to the point where we're playing like it in 2025? That's the storyline. And I think that the biggest thing, you're talking about year 2 development. That's probably, to me, the biggest thing I am looking for, specifically when you go and talk about the front 7, the defensive line. We know what we have with Mateo. We know what we have with Tatum. We know what we have with Amari Washington. The ceiling of this Oregon Ducks team, if this Oregon team breaks through and wins a national championship in the 2025 season, it's going to be guys like Tyone Gray. It's going to be guys like Aiden Breland or Jericho Johnson or Elijah Rushing. That class specifically on the defensive line was elite that they brought in 2024. A lot of those guys were not ready to play as freshmen, which I don't think is a problem. If this team goes out and wins a national championship, it's because this defensive line, these young, talented defensive linemen are ready to dominate in the 2025 season. And we talk about it all the time. Look at the past teams that have won national championships. I'm talking about Michigan in 2023 or Georgia in 2022, Georgia in 2021, the teams that Dan Lanning was a part of. He knows what it looks like. He knows what a national championship defense looks like. That starts with dominating on the defensive line. And Dan Lanning has put a ton of resources into getting this defensive line capable of going out and dominating. And now it's, hey, what do we hear from these guys in spring ball going into 2025? Are they that unit that can go dominate a football game? We'll close it out there. Not a ton to talk about so far. There's going to be a lot more. Hopefully some commitments coming down the road as well. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.